Hello everyone, it's Thursday and today we're talking about schedules, which I am super psyched about. So I'm going to share my screen. Um, Whoops, that was not the screen I wanted to share. Shocking, I know. I want to share this screen. Just this screen, please. Let's see. I would love to know if you're here, if you would share with me that you are here. I also would love not to have this crazy looking screen. Um, okay, just a minute. There's a way to do this. I know there is. I've done it before. Well, there's an easier way to do this. There we go. I knew there was a way. Sorry about that. Sometimes I just lose my mind. How is everyone? How is your summer? I am super excited because I actually took this from something that we're doing in the Special Educator Academy in our study group. Ah, so much better. Good. Now let me make sure I have my comments so I can see you guys. Awesome. Hi, Marianne from Toronto. And Joanne from Ocean County, New Jersey. Summer is flying by, Jamie. Yes, I think it is. It is definitely flying by. Oh my gosh. Um, and I, unlike you, mine is backwards because my summer's very busy and then I get to go on vacation. So mine is flying by, but not always in a good way. Um, and so I am taking this directly from our, move myself out of the way here. I'm taking this directly from our course on setting up your classroom to maximize engagement. So that's what I'm going to talk about today is the classroom. Hi, Lourdes. You're not too far from me. I'm in Lakeland. Hi, Nora. I am so glad you guys are here. Um, and so today I'm going to talk about schedules. And so I will be talking about some of the points to think about. I'm going to give you some tips to think about, and I'm going to share a couple strategies for you. Whoops. Um, and this is just my contact information and credits. And here's what we're going to talk about. I'll tell you a little bit about the teaching plan and schedule toolkit because it also comes from that. But then I want to get to the principles and setting up the schedule itself. We'll talk about the nuts and bolts of how we decide what goes in it, how to put it together. I'm going to show you a few examples. I'll show you where to find some case study schedules and some free schedules that you can download. And then I've got some final reminders that I want to share with you. So this is just the, and I'll make sure these links go in the post when I'm done here. But this is my classroom teaching plan and scheduling toolkit. So it's got video tutorials and checklists for making schedules, for putting the tip together, because these two things really have to go together. For me, I create the teaching plan that I talked about last week, and it is the building block for my schedule. It tells me what's going to go in my schedule once I have it done. It tells me what my activities are going to be. Now, sometimes I do it and then I do my schedule and I go, oh, I have too many things that I need to put into the time I have. So I have to go back and change my tip a little bit to match my schedule. So it is always a back and forth with all the different components that go into making this up. It's also really important to remember that no one has ever said, I am so glad that my schedule worked out the first time and that nothing ever changed when school started. No one has ever said that in a classroom. Schedules never stay the same. We always start school and somebody changes stuff, and that's the way it goes. We always set up a schedule thinking that we're going to have the best schedule ever, and then something happens. We get a new kid, a kid doesn't show, everybody changes all my special times, whatever it is. So it is always a process. And that first few weeks of school, a lot of it is we put our schedule in place and then we tweak it as we find out what works and what doesn't. So I'm not saying that when you do this, you're going to have the perfect schedule. What I am saying is that you're going to have a schedule that you start with, which is a whole lot better than starting in chaos. So when we think about schedules, what I'm trying to come up with is essentially a schedule that looks like this. I'm going to move myself around again. So it's going to give us, I like to color code because I find it easier for me to process. And it allows me to be able to look at things and see them quickly. I'm often color coding by which adults are with the students, whether they're in or out of the classroom. I use various things depending on the complexity of the situation. Um, and you can see my darling Edge Eclipse icon here for the builder, because sometimes we are an architect when we're building the classroom, sometimes we're a builder. And to me, we are building a schedule. We are building it in blocks is really what we're doing. So what we're trying to do when we create a schedule, some of you may be in a situation where you have enough staff where maybe you do have one-to-one. Most of you probably are not in that situation. Even if you are in that situation, that's not something we want to stay in for the long term. That's not what we want our students to be in forever. It's not an efficient mode for them to learn in. It's not our end goal. So we're trying to take each student's individualized needs and turn it into a classroom, turning into a context in which we're meeting the individualized needs of the students, but we're doing it as a class. And that's really the biggest challenge when you're trying to put together a special ed classroom. And it's even more challenging if you're putting together a resource classroom where children are coming in and out, going into the special ed class, going into the regular ed class, because you're trying to time it with that as well. We're trying to set up clearly defined periods of the day where there's a clear beginning and a clear end. You really don't want a schedule that just kind of rolls throughout the day. You want to know this started and you want to know when it ends, because the students need to know when it starts and when it ends. And you want to make sure that you have activities that you have embedded IEP goals and your curriculum into, so that you're able to say, we're doing this activity because we're addressing these goals. Oh, where are those goals being addressed? They're being addressed in these activities. So we really want to be able to articulate that, but we also want to be able to implement that. Both of those are critically important. We want to make sure that the time that we're allotting to the activities are appropriate to the needs of each student. So if I've got any preschool teachers here with me today, you're probably going to have shorter activities than those who might be teaching later elementary or high school. Some of you may have 10-minute activities because that's all that your students can manage. And some of you may have 30-minute activities because that's what your students can manage. And it isn't all age related. So some of you may have pre-K classes that can handle a 30-minute group time. And some of you may have high school classes that can handle only a 10-minute group time. So we have to allot the time based on the needs of our students. We want to make sure that we've got time that we are having full group activities, whatever that means in our classroom, because we do want our students to learn that skill. We want them to move from their more isolated instruction that they need to learn to really learning in a group, because that is the way that we learn in a general ed classroom. That's learning in the next environment. That's how we move our students out of their more isolated environment and into a larger environment. That's part of teaching to the next environment, which we always need to be thinking about doing. And we want to make sure that for the majority of the students that are spending time in a special ed class, they typically have academic goals and social skills and behavioral goals as well. Because if they only have academic goals, most of them are probably included, except for a few who may just have academic goals that are so far off the general ed curriculum that they really need intensive academic instruction outside the general ed class. But most of those students are also having social and behavioral issues because there's such a big gap. But certainly there are always, in special ed, there are always individualized exceptions. So always take what I say with that in mind. So Lucy says she always introduced a lesson in a whole group for 10 to 15 minutes. So that's a really good way. You're introducing it to the group and then you're breaking it down. You always want to be teaching to that next environment. So when I think about the decisions that go into developing that schedule, I think about selecting the activities. So when I'm selecting my activities, there's some things I have to think about. What activities make sense for the classroom that I'm teaching? And those of you that have been doing this for a while, you know that this year's class may not look like, well, I hope that nothing looks like last year's class. Might not look like your 2019 class. Sometimes I think I'll just forget that 2020 happened. So we want to think about who is in our class this year, which is why we do the tip. Because I've been in classes where this year, the caseload in that class are primarily students who are out in the gen ed environment most of the day. And so they're out in their regular ed class and the staff is out supporting them. And there isn't a lot of classroom activity in that special ed classroom. But next year, the crew who's coming into that class is going to need a lot more self-contained type of work just because of the level of supervision that they need, the level of behavioral support that they need, the level of academic work that they need, the smaller group work that they need. And because of that, that classroom is going to look entirely different. Same teacher, same classroom, completely different schedule. So what the activities look like are going to be completely different. So now we're going to have a lot of small group. So we've been in classes where we had 30-minute group, social skills, games, a whole bunch of language activities one year. And then the next year, we're having a lot more discrete trials, direct instruction, two-on-one kinds of instruction in our classroom the next year, because it just depends on who is there. Similarly, if I'm in a preschool classroom, I'm probably going to have dramatic play. I'm probably going to have a play activity. I'm probably going to have circle. But if I'm in a high school class, I'm probably not going to have circle. I might have calendar time. I might have our morning meeting time. I might have whole group time, but I'm probably going to call it something different. What we do during it is going to look different because I'm going to look for age relevant skills. I'm going to look for skills that are going to be relevant for the student's age, even though developmentally they may be doing some of the same skills, learning how to use a calendar, learning how to recognize their name. They may be doing some of those same developmental skills, but we're going to do it in a way that's more age appropriate. I'm not going to have play skills in a high school, but I'm going to have leisure skills because those students may need to learn how to occupy their free time in an appropriate way. And they need to be introduced to skills that are age relevant for them, that are leisure skills that other kids their age are exposed to. Then we have to think about allocating time. How long should our activities be? And that's, kind of a guessing game if we don't know the students well. So we pick and we go, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to say this is a 10-minute class. So my centers are going to be about 10 minutes. And then you look in that first week of school and you see if it worked or it didn't. Oh, we could go longer. It's going really well. I think we could bump it up to 15 minutes. Or, oh, no, that doesn't work. I thought they could go 20 minutes and boy, was I wrong. It needs to go down to 15. So you make your best guess based on what you know of your students and then you decide. It may also depend on the activities. So, some activities may be able to be longer than others. So, a whole group activity is probably going to be shorter than a small group activity or an individual activity. Then you have to think about how you're going to group your students. So are you going to put your higher groups of students together and your more intensive needs students together? Or are you going to split them up? Are you going to have an independent student with a less independent student? Don't think that you have to put students together just based on them being on the same curriculum or the same needs, because you're probably not going to be able to do that if you teach a K through 6 class. Or maybe you will. Maybe you're going to have a K through 6 class, but they're all on the same grade level. I've had that happen too. And that's a question I get a lot. I get, how am I going to do this? I'm sorry, I'll stop moving my hands quite so much. It's actually distracting me. I get a lot. How am I going to teach this mixed level class? Well, you're going to figure out sometimes it makes sense. Apparently, I can't do it without moving my hands. You're going to think about the fact that sometimes it makes sense to put a more independent student with a less independent student, and then switch them so that they have the opportunity to be with students who have opposite skills at other times of day. Sometimes it makes sense to put that student who's more independent with other students with social skills that they can interact with, and put the other student with another student who is struggling. So you've got to look at that. Whoops, sorry about that. Then we got to look at how we're going to put our activities together. So I often think about the hardest student, the one that I know is going to who's really going to struggle when I give him hard things to do. He's going to need to be with me doing some harder work. And then he's going to need to go to independent work where he gets to do stuff that he knows how to do and someone's not in his face. And I kind of call that the in your face time, out of your face time. That's the kid that I schedule first because he's the kid who needs that careful sequencing across the day. And then once I schedule him, the rest are more flexible and I can fill them in a little bit easier. And then we move to putting it all together. And I use just a simple table. It may have 15-minute blocks down the left. It may have 10-minute blocks down the left. It may be blank down the left and I'm filling it in as I go. It just depends. Usually I start with 15-minute or 10-minute blocks and then I cross them out and change them for different things. And I just put the kids' names across the top and I just start to fill it in. So when I do that, I start with the students whose needs are the most demanding. Now, I will also say, I think I took a slide out because I don't want this to take too much of your time. But I also start with the things I cannot change. Please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, such as lunch and specials and the times that my children must go to general ed. These are the things I cannot change. Think of them as Stephen Covey's large rocks. You must put them in your schedule first because you cannot move them. So those are the things you have to put in first because the sand will go around them, but the big rocks won't. So put them in first, then you can schedule around them. So lunch, specials, recess, all those things you can't change, go in there first. Then start with the students whose needs are more demanding, that in your face, get out of my face kid. That kid goes in first, then you can move the other kids around. Make sure that as you're adding your scheduled activities, you really know what you're going to be addressing in each of those activities. Every activity of your day, our students have no time to waste, so there should be goals that they're working on in each thing, including lunch, including recess, because chances are good that most of our special ed kids have those hours as instructional hours during the day. And then think about, too, if you've got students who are going into general ed, think about if we're supporting social skills on the playground, at recess, or in PE, or at lunch, is that something they need support for? And what is that going to do for your zoning plan, which we'll talk about in a couple weeks? What does that do for your staff support, and how does that impact your schedule? Because if I have to send someone with that student to recess, I'm going to be down a staff. So do I need to adjust my schedule accordingly? Maybe I only have 2 centers during that time because I know I can't have 3 staff. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about that kind of ahead of time. Because again, there's going to be give and take. You're going to do your zoning plan and maybe have to make some changes to your schedule. I always do. So this is an example, and I pulled it out because it kind of meets one of the challenges of preschool is that I know a lot of the preschool folks teach half day and half day. And this is a classroom that taught full day with some kids coming in the morning and only in the morning. So these 3 kids that are here in the morning, you see they're grayed out in the afternoon. They got dismissed halfway through. This kid came in the afternoon. And so you kind of see how we covered them with that. I use center rotations in most of my schedules. So you'll see often, and there's a key down at the bottom, direct instruction, independent work, and play. So the teacher's doing what we're generically calling direct instruction, which is a small group instruction of usually at this age, it's learning readiness skills, basic academics. So maybe for some kids, it might be letter identification. For some kids, it's attending, it's following directions, it's answering basic questions. It might be expressive interceptive language kinds of things. We're working on teaching play skills, and then we're working on independent work systems. And you can see where I've written in who's going to speech and being pulled partway through this time. Although I don't quite know why it's at 10:30. We do something that we call table tasks, which is where we put visual motor kinds of tasks, so puzzles for little kids, shape sorters, file folders, things that don't have a big language pieces in it, that students are more likely to engage in without a lot of supervision, things that will eventually go into their independent work systems. Those things go on, they're usually done at a table, so we call it table tasks. So they do that. They work on fine motor skills. That's something that keeps them engaged with fewer people. We use that at a time that we can then pull the kids from bathroom time. We can then zone our classrooms so that somebody is supervising them and somebody is taking kids to the bathroom. So we're sending kids to somebody in the bathroom. The person who has these kids is in charge as long as they're with them. Someone is taking kids back and forth. When the kids come into the bathroom, someone else is in charge of them. That means that we're keeping kids busy. We're not having a lot of wait time. So my whole approach is if we can keep the kids engaged and not lose that engagement, we have a much better day. You lose the engagement, it takes you 10 times as long to get it back as it does to just keep them engaged. They go to PE, we have a choice time, another option for keeping students engaged. We do another circle in the afternoon, we do lunch, and then we dismiss. There's a mandatory quiet time. We do a games and art time in the afternoon, then snack, then another choice time, and then we pack up and go home. This is a middle school that I just kind of pulled it to have kind of a example of secondary, and then I'm going to show you where you can find 5 free grid schedules so that you can have them for an example. You can see buses don't come in at the same time, so we start with choice time. Choice time is a pretty structured time for me. We've got a choice board. The students have to make a choice of specific activities. They need to engage in those activities for that amount of time. Then we have an exercise time to start our day. Then they go to breakfast. Then they had morning meeting. And you can see these guys can handle a 30-minute morning meeting. Then they had 4 centers because we had, we actually only had 2 staff. I'm sorry, we have 3 centers. I just have them set for a half an hour and I broke them down into 15-minute blocks, so I'm losing my mind. We had a work time with the teacher, an independent work time, and these kids were able to do that with just outside supervision from the aide, and we did an art activity. Then they went to lunch. We did daily living skills and bathrooming time. We did a very long leisure choice time in this classroom, and we did that because there were only 2 staff, and the only way that the teacher, I think in this case, no, the only way that I could give the aide a break, the teacher got a break during lunch, but the aide went to lunch with the kids. The only way to give the aide a break was to have something that the teacher could manage by herself. So it's very important to me that people have the opportunity to get out of the room and take a break. And I'll talk more about that when I talk about paras later. We added choice time. Choice time is a downtime. The students have to learn how to make choices. They need to learn how to accept when a choice is not available. They need to learn how to stay with a choice that they've made. They're also learning different leisure activities, which at middle school was critical for these guys because they didn't know how to entertain themselves when they didn't have a lot of, when they didn't have something structured to do. So we were teaching them and introducing new leisure activities through our choice time. They also needed to accept when something wasn't available. So they all really liked to say computer, and there's only 2 computers. So once those were full, they had to choose something else. So that was a learning lesson for them. Then we did a social skills lesson for our afternoon group. We did school jobs and independent work, PE, snack, and then we packed up and went home. And I really wish I could find a way that you could just say, Alexa, please redo my schedule, because as I said, the big piece about the schedule is sitting down at the end of the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the 5th day of school and going, what worked? what didn't work. And usually there are a few things on the schedule that didn't work, and then we go back and we fix them. We make changes, we see what works that day. We make a couple tweaks, we see what works. And usually by the end of the first week, you've got a schedule that works. It just depends on how many things change as time goes on. So if you go, and again, I'll put this in the post when I get off, but if you go to ACR links, which is autismclassroomresourceslinks.com/schedule, you can sign up for the free resource library. You'll just be signing up for my newsletter. You can unsubscribe right after if you want. You'll get a username and password for everything in the resource library. And there is a download in the resource library for 5 of these grids. So it's got the 2 I showed you, and there's 3 more. There's a high school, there's a couple preschool, there's a couple elementary, and a couple middle school. And so maybe there's 2 elementary. I don't know. There's a preschool, 2 elementary, 2 middle, and a high. That's 6. It also will take you to, this link will also take you to a post that will take you to where these schedules, if you don't want to join the library, you don't have to download them. They're actually in individual posts that talk about the classrooms themselves. So it will tell you what the classroom was like, how it's made up, and all that kind of stuff. So it's got a ton of different information like that about each one. They're a little bit dated, and some of them are still not quite reformatted from a blog redo that went up at the beginning of the pandemic. So I'm still working on that. So forgive me if it's not always that. So there's that. And then I wanted to give you these tips. The first is downtime is not your friend in the classroom. It really isn't. Because once you lose the engagement of your students, it is not a good thing. When you lose the engagement, you've lost your battle. So that is really the main first thing. You also want to plan a strategy for rotations. So when you think about rotating your students through centers, you may not want, or just sending your kids from a group to go check their schedules. If your schedules are all in one place, maybe not send all the kids at once because they kind of climb all over each other. So you might think about sending a couple at a time. So think about what those rotations might look like. You might want to think about how you're going to make your transitions orderly and quick so that everybody's not at the same place. They're not all at the schedules at the same time. They're not all going to one place at the same time. So, you think about it a lot in preschool. If you taught preschool for a while, okay, who has on a blue shirt? Everybody with a blue shirt can go to the such and such a place. Same thing you can do with older students. Maybe not if you have on a blue shirt, but, tell me one thing you did, this kid and this kid, tell me one thing you did last night. Oh, you watched this show? Go check your schedule. Oh, you did this? Go check your schedule. So you can actually embed some other skills into those things that aren't as young, but still is really making that transition more orderly. Not every student has to be in the activity for the same amount of time. And I think that is one of my biggest things. Now, it does not mean that one student's there for 5 minutes and one student's there for 7 minutes and one student's there for 9 minutes and one student, no. It means that if most of your students can handle being there for 15 minutes, but you've got a couple kids that can only do 5, don't make the 5-minute kids sit there for 15 minutes, and don't necessarily make everybody be there for 5 minutes. Schedule the class to be there for 15 minutes, have the 2 kids that can only be there for 5 come for 5, and plan what they're going to do for the other 10 minutes. Because chances are good if you said that they're going to stay there for 15 minutes, somebody would be having to deal with them for the other 10. So take that somebody and set up and plan another activity for them, an independent work time, an instructional time. Pick something for them to do, set them up with a staff member, and plan something for that time. And then over time, you could start looking at how you can extend their stay in that group activity. So don't limit yourself to the idea that just because everybody else can do it, that kid has to too. But you do want to plan for it when you have a couple students that aren't going to be in that time period at the same time. And whatever you do when you're thinking about your schedule, you want to end your activities with success, because If we are ending with the whole thing falling apart, our activity's too long. We're asking them to be there. And that could be your lunch is too long, your snack is too long. I know people think that those things, that kids like those things and they can't be too long. But if the kids are wandering away before lunch is over, they're wandering away before snack is over, it's too long. They're finished. They're done. If you don't have any control over how long lunch is, take things for them to do when they're done with their lunch to keep them engaged. Because the more that you work to keep them engaged, the easier your day goes, because re-engaging them will take 10 times as much of your energy as it will to keep them engaged throughout the day. And that's really the key to the whole thing. Worry in the first couple weeks just about keeping them engaged. As you get them into that routine and you get used to having them be engaged, then you really can start focusing on what they are engaged with. Because in that first couple weeks, you're figuring out what engages them and figuring out what they need. So then you start to really think about what it is. But for this first week or so, you're really looking at how can I keep them engaged as they learn the schedule, as you learn what they like, as you learn what they're doing. Questions, thoughts? All right, let me come back to myself. All right. Yeah, and I love Lucy's idea about introduce the lesson to the whole group and then break it up. And I think I have that as a suggestion in a lot of my TPT resources, like task cards. Present the lesson of how to do it, put the card on the projector, put it on the whiteboard, show them how to do it, and then have them break up. So if you're looking for more help on how to do schedules, how to put things together, come and join us. We've got a 7-day free trial in the Special Educator Academy. We've got a whole course. We've got a study group going where we're walking together through this. And I'm in the midst of putting together a whole bunch of new training that some of our new members asked for on how to teach new routines for the beginning of the year and things like that. And so I'm taking a lot of all different kinds of suggestions. So 4th to 6th grade. Yeah, and you really, it's 4th to 6th grade, but who knows where their skills are. So they might be 1st to 8th, 1st to 6th grade. Who knows? Yeah, a large group and then do centers. And I think that's a really good way to go. That has worked really well. I went looking for new schedules for the Academy just to give them some different ones when I was doing our study group Zoom session the other night. I was like, I want to find some that you guys who've been with us for a long time haven't seen before. And I'm like, they look a lot alike. But I've had some that I'm like, whoa, that's a really different schedule. That's a frightening schedule. I've had some that's like, that's way too many people. But they're really scary. So yeah, look at, where you're losing them. So as you go through that first week in your troubleshooting, think about where am I losing them and how do I tighten that up? What can I do? Take fidgets, pull out a choice board. Choice boards are also really good if your kids are used to them for that time that the music teacher had to go home sick and suddenly you don't have music and you've got 30 minutes to fill. That choice board is, that gives us 15 minutes to fill before I think of something else we can do. So if they know how to use it, it becomes a really good thing to use in a pinch. And you can read more about that. I've got some blog posts on that on my blog. All right. Well, I will make sure that those links are in the post when I get off of here. And if you are watching the recording, feel free to share questions below and tag me. Thank you so much, guys. I'm so glad you were here. I will be back next week at the same time, and I'm talking next week about floor plans and physical space. Bye, guys.